Balaclava submarine base. In a city in Siberia known as Balaclava, a secret underground base that held submarines of the Soviet Union quietly hid military technology from the outside world. There were nuclear-armed subs that could have destroyed the whole city if they'd been discovered. But during the Cold War, no one knew about this place, which was built between 1953 and 1961. It was dug into the side of the Tavros mountain, taking 120 tons of solid rock out of the ground and carving a man-made cave to serve as the underground port for some of the deadliest ships in human history. Many secret programs took place in this base, including a plan where special trainers taught dolphins how to attach explosives to enemy ships or submarines. I've heard of war elephants, but not war dolphins. When the Soviet Union fell in the early 1990s, the base was closed. By 1993, there was nothing stopping looters from coming in and stripping the place bare. More recently, in 2014, Russia actually annexed the Crimea region and turned the area into a museum. Its spook inn was abandoned for many years and housed some earth-shattering power. That's worth a second look for sure. Have any of you been to this or any other decommissioned military base? What were they like? Let me know in a comment, and if you like this topic, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome videos coming out all the time. They are full of awesome facts you didn't know you needed to know.
Camp Century. Camp Century was a secret nuclear research facility first constructed by the United States military between 1959 and 1960. It was constructed deep beneath the Greenland ice cap. While this secret nuclear facility was labeled as a base for scientific research, the facility was actually part of an extremely secret project known as Project Iceworm, and it was actually designed to keep nukes in storage in case of a necessary nuclear strike against the USSR due to all-out conflict. At the time, this project cost the government about $7.9 million, which equals $69 million in today's money. It consisted of at least 21 tunnels that spanned a whopping 1.9 miles. However, no nuclear missiles ended up being launched from this facility. As we all know, the Cold War ended and there was no nuclear disaster, thank goodness. Now we have other things to worry about. The site was abandoned in 1966 after Denmark protested its existence, and experts realized the ice in which the facility was built was far less stable than first believed. However, toxic waste still remains at the site today, which is worrying as the ice could melt and leak nuclear toxic waste into the ocean. Great.
Russian flying submarine. You might think a flying submarine is a completely ridiculous notion. And it is, since everything about an airplane is contradictory to everything about a submarine. How could you possibly plunge an airplane into the water and then have it act like a submarine? It's crazy. And the only people crazy enough to try such a ridiculous idea was the Soviet Union back in World War II. And they came close to building a flying sub. The project was in the hands of Boris Ukashov, who proposed that it was possible to build a craft that was half submarine and half airplane. In 1936, Ushakov pushed forward a draft to the project, and soon after the Scientific Research Committee decided to pursue it. However, the following year, a second committee reviewed the project and abandoned it, which is a shame, really, since the design was extremely impressive. The flying submarine would have done 100 knots in the air and 3 knots underwater. It would have had its engines sealed behind metal plates while underwater, with 6 hermetically sealed chambers inside of its hull and its wings. This was actually a meticulously well-designed project. It's a shame it never saw the light of day. Perhaps our aerial landscape would look very different today if it did.
Buran-class orbiter. It is no secret that man has tried for decades to conquer space. In that time, various countries have tried their hand at launching spacecraft of one type or another. But that doesn't mean every single one is a success. The first spacecraft produced as part of the Soviet space program had a very short lifespan. In fact, it only took one spaceflight, known as the Buran, which means snowstorm or blizzard. The craft was built in the 1980s and was the first operational shuttle orbiter to come out of Russia. Construction of the plane began in 1980. 4 years later, the first full-scale orbiter was ready for launch, and it lifted off while attached to the back of the Energia rocket before separation. The craft completed 2 orbits around the Earth before descending and returning to the launch site. Plans continued to have a second unmanned flight by 1993, but as the Soviet Union dissolved, funding dried up and additional flights were canceled. With a wingspan of almost 80 feet and weighing in at almost 50 tons, the craft was an impressive feat of engineering. It was further showcased at the 1989 Paris Air Show and with 2 other craft due to be built in the early 1990s. Unfortunately, plans were scrapped and the Buran was mothballed in a hangar in Kazakhstan. The future of any other Buran ships came crashing down when the roof of the hangar collapsed, killing 8 workers and destroying the original spacecraft as well as a mock-up of the Energia booster rocket that helped propel the craft into space. A real tragedy, with both loss of life and the destruction of an amazing technological advancement. This marked a disappointing and anticlimactic end to the space program that showed such promise to the people of Russia.
Cincinnati subway. One of the biggest secret technologies in Cincinnati is right beneath everybody's feet, as reported by The Verge. Most people who live in Cincinnati probably don't have any clue that there's an entire subway system beneath the city streets. The Cincinnati subway system is America's most extensively abandoned metro. This subway project was a massive failure. The construction commenced with high hopes in the early 1900s. There were over 2 miles of tunnels built along 4 major stations before the costs of the metro forced the leaders in the city to abandon the project in 1924, leaving Cincinnati without the subway it deserves. This is just another doomed mega project that could have helped boost America's infrastructure. Instead, it ended up robbing Cincinnati of millions of dollars, about $305 million in today's money. And now, it's just a bunch of filthy, abandoned tunnels filled with graffiti and probably 1 or 2 dead bodies. Though that is absolutely conjecture. There have been proposals to reuse the tunnels and try to make something of the abandoned metro, but nothing has ever come to fruition. The only good thing about the Cincinnati subway station is that it lures urban explorers from all over the country to explore its winding and decrepit passageways.
Tsar tank. Here's another bizarre feat of Russian engineering. This one goes back to World War I. It's a monster tank that never ended up being put into use, known as the Tsar tank. It was 60 tons of steel, 3 stories high, 18 meters long, and 12 meters wide. The lunatics behind this project actually built one in 1915 inside a village on the outskirts of Moscow. The hull was lined with steel armor. The interior was loaded with impressive 76.2 millimeter cannons for ultimate devastation. And there were exactly 15 operators who needed to be present to operate the machine. The only problem was that it wouldn't move. The moment the giant tank was moved off its supporting base, it wouldn't go anywhere. It literally could not move an inch. There had been a massive error in the calculations and it was too heavy. Its rear roller was stuck in the ground and it wasn't going anywhere. The vehicle actually got left in the field because there was nothing that they could do with it. And while they tried to do revisions to build another tank, there was a massive revolution in 1917 and everybody forgot about the Tsar tank. Some greedy folks eventually scrapped it for parts in 1926.
The Hiller Flying Platform. In the 1950s, a company known as Hiller Helicopters signed a contract to build a prototype of a small flying machine for the Office of Naval Sciences. 9 months later, engineers unveiled the first design of what was dubbed the Flying Platform. Built for the Army-Navy program, the one-man flying vehicle was controlled by the pilot by leaning in the desired direction. Using a special dual-direction fan for elevation, the platform was practically incapable of falling, meaning if the pilot leaned too far, the platform would simply slow down rather than flip over. The prototype, called 1031-A-1, was completely unprecedented at the time. With a platform diameter of just over 8 feet and a height of 7 feet, this weird device weighed in at almost 400 pounds. The Army later contracted for a larger model called the VZ-1 Pawnee, but the extra engines it needed made it so heavy that it was impossible for pilots to control the craft by leaning, effectively defeating the purpose of the design. In total, 6 flying platforms were built, and although the possibility of controlled flight on a wingless aircraft seemed like a novel idea, the fact that it could only reach speeds of up to 16 miles per hour made it a research vehicle to study aerodynamics more than anything else. Would you want to have your own flying platform? Let me know what you'd use it for in the comments section below.
The Chicago Mega Station. Another abandoned and poorly thought-out infrastructure project is home in Chicago. You might remember this huge bungle from just a few years ago. It happened when the city of Chicago decided to bury roughly $400 million of taxpayer money into something known as the Block 37 CTA Superstation. Constructed in the very center of downtown, the city pressed ahead with the construction even though there was absolutely no guarantee that the station would ever be used. At the time, it had been proposed by Elon Musk's The Boring Company, and it was intended as a futuristic airport link between O'Hare Airport and the city center. While the Block 37 Superstation may not be that technologically impressive, It still remains abandoned today as a wasted attempt at infrastructure. Work began in 2005 and then was halted in 2011. The superstation is still unfinished. It serves absolutely no purpose and it wasted nearly $500 million of taxpayer money in the city of Chicago. Maybe one day it'll be turned into an amazing superstation, but for now, it's just an abandoned construction site with absolutely no use to anyone.
Thought camera. Imagine a camera that can photograph your thoughts. This is exactly what Nikola Tesla, the famous Serbian inventor, dreamed of inventing back in the 1890s. According to the history, Nikola Tesla was convinced that he could create a camera that would photograph people's thoughts. He thought that because an image is formed in the human mind, it must produce an image on the back of the retina. Tesla figured that by somehow projecting the image from the back of someone's retina onto a screen, he could capture the images they were thinking about. This is total mad scientist nonsense, of course, but it would have been a very cool invention if he'd continued working on it. And perhaps some other crazy scientist would have followed in his footsteps and worked into the new century. Of course, this is not the only wild invention that Tesla had been wanting to create. He'd also, according to himself, inadvertently began the creation of an earthquake machine, almost tearing apart his building in New York. Tesla had also once had funding from J.P. Morgan to begin designing a global wireless energy service, but the funding fell through, and so did the technology. If Tesla had been funded properly, who knows what our world would look like today? Let us know what you think in the comments below what you think, and be sure to subscribe if you're new here.
Russian Tupolev Tu-144 aircraft. The Concorde is one of the most infamous airplanes ever created. It is well known for letting passengers zip across the Atlantic Ocean in less than 4 hours. But did you know the Soviet Union built a similar aircraft that flew earlier? In the 1960s, a Russian aerospace firm created 5 prototypes of a supersonic passenger plane. The first result was the Tupolev Tu-144, but these initial designs definitely had some differences compared to their better-known Western rivals. With a frame built with panels instead of a solid fuselage like the original Concorde, the craft suffered deep cracks and problems under lighter stress than originally predicted. After all, these airplanes were traveling faster than the speed of sound and twice as high as traditional jet aircraft. Stress is part of the job. But the Russian firm wanted to be the first to finish their supersonic passenger plane, and it showed. In an attempt to beat other nations who were trying to come up with similar designs, the first version of this hyper-fast aircraft didn't have functioning toilets. It also lacked fire control suppression systems and could not brake other than by using a parachute. There was also reportedly no insulation for passengers' comfort, and it was reportedly such a loud, bumpy ride that passengers had to pass notes to have a conversation. Initial test flights only clocked in at about 800 hours, compared to the 5,000 hours used to test each Concorde plane. But the Russians got their way when their first prototype rolled off the assembly line a full 2 months before the Concorde. Requiring 2 pilots and 1 engineer to fly, the plane could hold up to 120 business-class passengers and reach speeds of up to Mach 2.04 or more than 1,300 miles per hour. Conspiracy theories surround the creation of the plane, with some believing it was built from Concorde plans stolen by Russian spies. Others believe that the Concorde team, knowing the Russians might try to stage a coup, created fake plans with several design flaws, which could be why the Tu-144 only flew en route from Moscow once a week. The government is said to have had such little confidence in a successful flight that no reports of the flight surfaced until after they had already been completed. This way, if the plane were to crash, the government could try to simply pretend like the flight never happened. The fate of the plane would come to a disastrous end when it performed risky maneuvers at the 1973 Paris Air Show. It ended up crashing and killing several people in nearby homes as well as the entire crew. By the 1980s, the plane had been almost completely phased out except for very few occasional military flights by the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, NASA funded a special program to leverage this unique and powerful plane for an advanced technical research working together with Russian scientists. By the end of the 20th century, that project was canceled as well, and now Tu-144 is retired to be a museum piece and a historical curiosity.
China's unused plutonium. If you thought America has a way of messing up infrastructure projects and basically throwing money down the drain, take a look at China. Specifically, take a look at their $883 million nuclear military facility. This facility lurks beneath the Sichuan Mountains in China, where the largest artificial tunnel and the largest artificial cave structure on the planet are located. That's right, China owns the largest artificial tunnel in the world. It took tens of thousands of workers to build this monstrosity of engineering, and they had to do it in the most horrendous conditions imaginable. The network of tunnels spans an astounding 14 miles, with their artificial caves measuring more than 1 million square feet in total. This subterranean complex beneath the mountains boasts an incredible 13 levels. It would make the dwarves of Middle-earth jealous. But inside this huge underground complex is a top-secret nuclear military plant. It had been commissioned by the Chinese government at the height of the Cold War in the 1960s. Inside the superstructure is a nuclear plant able to produce weapons-grade plutonium. You know, that stuff from the movies. But the project only ever reached 85% of its completion. The Cold War became not so cold in the 1980s, and the project was cancelled. Today, visitors can view this abandoned piece of technology as a tourist attraction.
Helios spacecraft. NASA is the biggest name when it comes to the space race, but their idea for a solar-powered satellite wasn't such a big hit. Known as the Helios prototype, the flying wing aircraft was remotely piloted and was created to demonstrate sustained flight at heights of up to 100,000 feet, as well as being able to fly non-stop for at least 24 hours. The first launch of the aircraft took place in 1999, and although it flew for 5 years, it never did go higher than 100,000 feet. But it came close. In 2001, the craft reached an unofficial world record height of 96,863 feet and stayed over 96,000 feet for more than 40 minutes during a test flight over Hawaii. With a wingspan of 247 feet, longer than both the U.S. Air Force transport and the Boeing 747 airliner, the Helios is made from carbon fiber, Kevlar, and a thin transparent plastic skin. Assembled in 6 sections, each one about 41 feet long, the craft was powered by electric motors mounted across its entire wingspan. Controlled remotely by a pilot on the ground in either a mobile control van or a fixed station, the craft's flight could be terminated by the use of a parachute system delivered on command and a homing beacon to locate it once it's safely back on the ground. Unfortunately, the final flight of the Helios came in 2003 when it experienced structural failure while flying over the island of Kauai. The mishap has been chalked up to the inability to predict the craft's sensitivity to changes in the atmosphere, such as turbulence. The craft became unstable, and after rapidly increasing speeds, pressure caused the wings to fail and solar cells on the upper surface to tear off. The result was the aircraft falling into the Pacific Ocean, a sad end to what could have been a game-changer for NASA. What do you think? Could it still be down under the sea, waiting for a treasure hunter to find it in the seas of Hawaii? It's not likely, as NASA did find most of the destroyed pieces of the plane, but one can always hope.
Dugar Radar Station. Deep in the forest of Ukraine stands a behemoth of abandoned technology. The Dugar Radar Station began construction in 1972 as a way for Soviet scientists to mitigate long-range missile threats. The massive tower is built of hundreds of giant antennas and turbines, and it stands a whopping 150 meters in height. In fact, this monstrous piece of technology is 700 meters long, looking like a giant wall of metal in the middle of the woods. It had once been a top-secret military base, very close to the location of Chernobyl near Pripyat. Both sites are now abandoned, of course, while the radar is in complete ruins. The whole purpose of the radar station was to detect nuclear attacks, within the first 2 or 3 minutes that a ballistic missile was launched. However, all it really managed to do was spook the Americans with its signal. People thought the Soviets had built a signal that could control mines or control the weather. In any case, the radar station reportedly cost twice as much as the actual nuclear facility. And according to CNN, the 1986 disaster at Chernobyl was the end of the facility. It was abandoned because of radiation and left to rot, and it never did detect any nuclear weapons.
Phobos-Grunt probe. As various space programs worked to send their craft into space, the race began to bring back life from other planets. But one Russian probe, known as the Phobos-Grunt, wasn't so successful. Launched to study Phobos, a moon near Mars, the spacecraft had one mission: to return soil samples to determine the origin and evolution of this moon. It would be Russia's first interplanetary mission since a previous unsuccessful mission in 1996. The voyage was supposed to be a 3-year plan to probe the atmosphere of the Red Planet, where the Phobos-Grunt would have released a Chinese orbiter. Later, a lander was supposed to collect 20 grams of rock and dust and make experiments to study the moon's environment. Launched in November 2011, ground control faced many challenges in trying to communicate with the probe. Deep space antennas used to track the craft were useless at a short distance because the probe crossed their field of view within a fraction of a second. This also made it difficult to transmit commands to the probe. This only left 7 minutes for controllers to track the craft each time it orbited. After a botched attempt to send it away from Earth, specialists tried to fix the communications problem. But after languishing in Earth's orbit for 2 months with no progress, the 14.5-ton spacecraft fell into the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Chile. Most of the craft burnt up upon re-entry, but some larger pieces survived as a lasting reminder of the lofty ideals and crushing setbacks of the Russian space program.
The underground Nazi city. The Nazis were basically a bunch of ants scurrying around trying to build the most impressive technology of the 1940s. They were all over the world. They were developing weapons, they were building impressive facilities, and they were trying to build the largest underground city in the world. This was in 1943 when the Nazis basically realized they were not going to win any wars ever again. They started in April of 1943, shrouded in complete secrecy. The project was known as Project Riese, which is the German word for giant. The construction involved 7 underground complexes, all connected by around 5.5 miles of tunnels. This was done under the Owl Mountains in what is now Poland. This was some half-baked idea as the war turned against the Nazis. It took thousands of prisoners of war just to start on the mega project. This included children and other forced labor slaves. At the time, the construction costs would have been around $60 million. The construction went on for about 2 years until May 1945. And we all know what happened in 1945. Most historians believe that the subterranean city would have been used either as a personal bunker for Hitler, a massive military base, or as a way for Hitler and his most trusted staff to escape and live the rest of their lives underground as moles. Nobody really knows the truth. The Maginot Line. The Maginot Line is a series of semi-subterranean concrete fortresses all connected through an underground railway. According to history, the border fortress was constructed in the 1930s as a method to prevent a German invasion of France. The name of the line was given after André Maginot, who was the French Minister of War during that time. France had already been invaded during World War I, and they were hoping to avoid it if another war with Germany was to break out. Of course, the Maginot Line didn't work. It also wasted about $3.7 billion in today's currency. Despite the impressive series of concrete fortresses, France was still invaded in May of 1940. The thing was that France's border with Luxembourg, Switzerland, Italy, and Germany all had robust defenses. But the border with Belgium had basically no protection. This is how the Nazis ended up invading France in 1940. They snuck in through the France-Belgian border. The Maginot Line was rendered useless soon after World War II and was effectively abandoned sometime during the 1960s. One of the biggest issues was that the technology had improved so much between World War I and World War II, then tenfold into the 1950s and 60s, and such fortification just didn't make sense anymore.
Panjandrum. This is probably the most ridiculous war invention ever. The idea makes sense, but in reality it just seems like a total waste of effort. Basically, the Panjandrum was a device designed by the British as an attempt to destroy Hitler's forces on the beaches of France. The Panjandrum was a giant pair of wheels with rockets attached to either side and a drum in the middle. The rockets were supposed to propel the device up the beach into the enemy's defensive wall, where the giant cylinder in the middle of the two wheels would then explode with explosives, therefore blowing a massive hole in the seawall and crippling the enemy. The theory is sound, it is a good idea, but the tests in 1943 and 44 were a complete disaster. The rockets attached to the wheels simply could not accelerate the rather crude device up the beach. Either the rockets would fall off, or they would fail, or they would just push the Panjandrum in a direction that it wasn't supposed to go. Great technology, but not very practical. According to Wired, rather than kill any Nazis, the Panjandrum once came close to killing a dog instead.
Straddling bus. As more cars take to the roads, it makes sense that someone would try to come up with a way to combat bumper-to-bumper traffic. Take, for example, the straddling bus. A Chinese invention, this futuristic-looking vehicle was a giant rolling tram that was able to slide over 2 lanes of traffic with space underneath for cars to continue on their drive. Designed to ride on tracks with an elevated body, the straddling bus first rolled out in 2017. Measuring 72 feet long and stretching 16 feet high, the elevated bus seemed like a good idea at the time. But it would be shady business going on behind the scenes that would be the downfall of this interesting design. 32 individuals from the investment company who had roped in lots of money to fund the vehicle's design were later arrested on charges of illegal fundraising, fraud, misrepresentation, and more. Money aside, One only has to take a look at the bus in action to see that even without the financial woes, there were problems waiting in the wings. After all, a hulking bus that would not only prevent the cars underneath from safely changing lanes, but also prevent significant risk to smaller vehicles and passengers was a massive danger. It proved to be too much for this rolling tram to be anything more than a pipe dream.
Norwegian Naval Base. The Norwegian naval base of Olavsvand was built in the late 1960s and cost roughly $500 million at the time, roughly $3.8 billion in today's currency. This incredible naval base was literally carved into the side of the mountain like something from a James Bond movie. There was absolutely no expense spared when constructing the base, filling it with the most advanced technology money could buy at the time. The mountain ended up being filled with tunnels and rooms over a period of 30 years. The point of the base was to act as a service facility for NATO submarines that were operating in the seas around Norway. However, with the fall of communism, the mountain naval base lost its strategic importance. The base ended up being deactivated in 2002 and eventually closed in 2008. But here's what makes this story of abandoned technology so hilarious and slightly ironic. You see, in 2011, this impressive naval base was sold to a consortium of Norwegian oil companies, and it has since been rented by affiliates of a Russian energy giant that has links to the Kremlin. So, after so much money and so much hard work making this base into a point of defense against communism, it's now being rented by one of the only communist countries left on Earth.
Airships. Before airplanes, there were airships. Think about blimps and zeppelins. In case you didn't know, the very first airship, called the Zeppelin LZ-1, took to the skies in 1900, 3 years before the famous flight of the Wright brothers. And in the early 20th century, airships were considered the future of air travel. They were lighter and much more effective than the original airplanes. And in World War I, they played a key role in military operations and were used for bombings. Airships were supposed to be the future. In the 1930s, there were luxury airships taking passengers across the Atlantic Ocean. Back in their day, airships were considered technological marvels. There were even rumors that the spire of the Empire State Building had originally been planned to be converted into a dock for airships. Of course, the popularity of airships came to a grinding halt when the Hindenburg exploded in 1937. With the advancements in airplanes and the deadly explosion on everyone's mind, funding and the interest in airship technology was abandoned overnight. It's amazing to think what the world might look like now if airship technology had never been abandoned. And one has to wonder if the luxury of traveling on an airship would ever return.
Boeing YAL-1 weapon system. When the U.S. Defense Department worked to create an airborne laser weapon system to attack ground targets, hopes from the military were high, but it wouldn't be their first. Before the Aero Optic Beam Control, or ABC turret, was developed in 2014, a previous attempt at a high-energy laser was tested. Known as the ABL, the airborne laser weapon was first fired in 2009 and 2010, but it didn't have that great of a track record. After successfully engaging several targets, only a few were destroyed due to what is described as a beam alignment problem. But that wouldn't stop the development of the YAL-1A high-energy laser weapon system. Designed to destroy tactical ballistic missiles, the system was carried aboard a modified Boeing 747 fighter aircraft. The weapon uses a set of 3 laser beam systems, one killing laser, and a set of illuminating laser beams as well as a beacon laser. But it was difficult to test the craft. It needed to fly over hostile territory, waiting for target missiles to be launched to focus the laser at a single point on the moving missile. To be able to launch it from a more stealthy position, the laser would have to be 20 to 30 times more powerful, which would come at a price tag of $1.5 billion and another $100 million a year to operate. As such, the program was scrapped, and in 2011, the craft made its final flight to an Air Force base in Arizona with an area known as the Boneyard, where other aircraft are stored after being retired from service.
Japanese war balloons. Everyone knows that the best technology is always developed during times of war. However, the most preposterous technology is also designed during times of war. During the Second World War, the Japanese were in a state of dismay over the Americans' superiority in the air, and so the Japanese tried to be innovative. In 1944 and 45, they tried to use unmanned balloons to bomb the Americans. This wasn't the best technology. The balloons were unmanned and equipped with bombs that were to automatically drop over American cities. They were launched from Japan, where they then drifted across the ocean towards North America. This was obviously an utter failure. According to Smithsonian Magazine, of the 9,000 bombs that were launched, only one managed to kill anyone, a woman and 6 kids in 1945 in Oregon. They were the only U.S. civilians to have died at enemy hands on American soil in the war.
The doomed super collider. Stepping away from old and abandoned military technology, let's take a look at the superconducting super collider, known as the SSC, also known as the Deserton. Most people are familiar with the super collider in Switzerland that recently discovered the Higgs boson God particle. Well, it could have been discovered by the superconducting super collider in Taxes. It would have been America's only particle collider, and it would have been able to rival the one built at the European Organization for Nuclear Research. According to Wired, the project was first proposed in 1976, and construction actually began 4 years later. However, as with everything that starts being made in America, costs got out of control and the project was canceled before it was ever finished. This seems completely insane considering the mega project had already sank about 4.3 billion of today's US dollars. A few more years and a few more dollars and the United States would have had their own superconducting super collider. However, now all that's left is an abandoned technology half developed that can't do any kind of super colliding. It can't even make you a slice of toast. North Dakota Safeguard Complex. Located in Tacoma, North Dakota, is the abandoned remnants of one of the biggest wastes of money ever. In fact, the Stanley R. Mickelson Safeguard Complex is a bewildering waste of taxpayer money. It was completed in April of 1975 at a cost of roughly $6 billion. The complex was top of the line, built beneath a bizarre pyramid structure and designed to provide launch and control for both short-range and long-range anti-ballistic missiles. But here's the kicker. This $6 billion complex was only fully operational for 24 hours. Immediately after it was finished being built, Congress deemed the base ineffective and completely pulled the plug on the whole operation. This was literally a day after it went to full operational capacity. To make this story even more ridiculous, the base was sold in 2012 for a tiny fraction of what it cost to make to a religious group. So far as we know, the base is now abandoned and falling into disrepair. The most expensive abandoned technology. Let me introduce you to one of Europe's largest military facilities, now completely abandoned and useless. The Zeljava Air Base was constructed by the Yugoslav armed forces between the 1940s and the 1960s. It was constructed under a mountain at a secret location, though not so secret anymore, on what is now the border of Croatia and Bosnia. The advanced military facility served as a command center and could warn against any possible nuclear strikes. The base could even withstand a direct hit from a nuclear warhead. It took about $6 billion to build the base back at the time, which equals an unbelievable $48.7 billion of today's currency. It was only operational until the beginning of the 1990s. It was eventually destroyed by the Yugoslav People's Army in the Yugoslav Wars of 1991. Ever since then, the immense and once secret structure has remained abandoned.
Schwerer Gustav German railway gun. This is probably the coolest piece of technology that never really worked out. Back in World War I, the Germans used a massive cannon fixed to the front of a train to bombard Paris. It was a huge weapon, like really, really huge. And it was so useful in the First World War that Adolf Hitler decided that it could be useful in 1936. The gun would be designed to be 1,350 tons and to fire 7-ton shells, a full 46 kilometers. That is some serious heft and firepower. However, the railway gun was completed too late and missed its chance to attack France. In 1940, it managed to fire 47 rounds into the city of Sevastopol, but the firing wore out the barrel. A second massive railway gun was built, but never used. By the middle of the 40s, these big guns were totally obsolete, thanks to the efficiency of airplane bombardments. Still, the Schwerer Gustav was the biggest gun ever built. Which of these abandoned technologies would you like to see reinvented? Let us know in the comments below, and thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video.